So what was it like living in ancient Israel in the times of the Bible? Well, ancient Israel is not a large country. It's long and it's thin. There are some main roads. These are major trading routes that go from the countries in the north round the Mediterranean coast into Africa. There are some major routes through it, but it's long and it's thin. It's quite mountainous at parts, which makes it quite tricky to get through. It's about 125 miles long when it was at its largest extent from Mount Hermon in the north down to the south. And it's only about 36 miles wide. Jerusalem to the coast is 36 miles, so it's not an enormous country. It's not too far off the size of Wales, if you want a modern comparison from our own country. And it is also a very extreme country in many ways. Mount Hermon is 9,000 feet tall. It's snow-capped. But you go to the Dead Sea and it's 1,300 feet beneath sea level, and it's often 40 degrees Celsius. So it very much is a place of extremes of temperature, extremes of height, and extremes of weather. There are some very condensed rainy seasons when the entire rainfall of London is squeezed into just 50 days. And if the rains fail, well, then the crops fail, and if the crops fail, you fail. So we're starting to see that we have a fragility to life in the ancient world as well. It's not as straightforward as perhaps we would think. And also, Israel didn't come into a blank canvas. When the Israelites came in, when the Hebrews came in after the Exodus into the Promised Land, there were people there, and those people there had their own gods. And so you always had a temptation to worship the gods of the land who were there before you went. So, for instance, Baal. Baal was the Canaanite god of rain and storms, and therefore to some extent fertility. And so when you're so reliant on the rain, yes, of course, you go and you worship at the temple to the one true God, but perhaps you might just hedge your bets a bit with Baal or the other gods who were there before. So you've got in ancient Israel a tendency to what's known as syncretism. That's the idea that you're merging the worship of God with the worship of the other gods who are there. So that's something of a temptation that is there. And living in the land is made difficult by warfare. And that's why you have this structure of these fortified cities with lands around them that were farmed, but the city was the main fort in case you were invaded. And life is made difficult by injustice. That's why so much of the Old Testament is there about protecting the boundaries of land, because people would come and take your land or they'd enslave you. This is a nomadic life in many ways, and so you had to be very cautious about people coming and taking your land or your cattle or your grazing area. And so life is made easier by having wisdom of how to live in the land. Look at the book of Proverbs, of how to deal with other people. It's made easier by celebrating life when you have it. Think of the great festivals that we have in the Old Testament. And ultimately, it's made easier by putting your trust in God and trusting God will deliver you from the various enemies that are around. So life was, compared to England, harsh in the ancient world. Life was fragile. Israel is a climate of extremes, and you were subject to invading armies and battles. You lived around fortified cities. You had the temptation to worship the gods that were there, but you also had the knowledge that if you worshipped the God of Israel and followed his commands, then he would protect you and he would be, to put it crudely, on your side as you tried to live. So that's, broadly speaking, what life was like in the ancient world. Nomadic, based around family units, very tribal, full of clans, if you like. A place with all sorts of temptations, but a place that had been given you by God. And if you followed his commandments, he would keep you there.